The office break room was dimly lit, the hum of the vending machine the only sound filling the space, until Daniel pushed the door open. His breath caught in his throat. Olivia stood there in a tight red dress, the deep neckline exposing more than he'd ever seen her wear to work. Her body was pressed against Ryan, his shirt already discarded, revealing the chiseled torso Daniel could never compete with. Olivia's nails trailed down Ryan's bare chest, her lips dangerously close to his ear, whispering something that made Ryan chuckle. For a second, she didn't notice Daniel. But then she looked up, her confident smirk vanishing as their eyes met. Her body stiffened. Ryan turned, confusion giving way to panic as he scrambled for his shirt. Silence. Heavy. Suffocating. Daniel's heart pounded. His hands clenched into fists. And in that moment, he knew. Everything was over. Part 1. The beginning of the end. Daniel was a hard-working 40-year-old man who had built a successful business, ensuring that his wife, Olivia, never had to worry about anything. When they first met, Olivia was a strikingly beautiful woman, 10 years younger than him, with an insatiable hunger for a luxurious lifestyle. From the start, it was clear that money played a huge role in her attraction to him, but Daniel believed that love could grow from stability, from a life of comfort and security. He was wrong. At first, their marriage was exciting. Trips to exotic places, extravagant dinners, and a lifestyle most people only dreamed about. Daniel was happy to provide, and Olivia was happy to receive. But something changed. The spark between them began to fade. The passion dwindled. Daniel chalked it up to routine, to the natural course of a long-term relationship, but Olivia was growing restless. She started staying out later, claiming work events were running long, or that she was meeting up with friends. Her phone became a permanent fixture in her hand, and she started dressing differently, sexier, bolder. When Daniel asked her about it, she simply smiled and brushed off his concerns. He should have seen the signs. Her job at a prestigious marketing firm introduced her to a new crowd, young, ambitious, and attractive professionals. Among them was one particular individual, a 27-year-old account manager named Ryan. He was everything Daniel wasn't. Youthful, energetic, with a sculpted physique that looked like it had been chiseled from stone. Olivia talked about him often, laughing at his jokes, praising his work ethic. At first, Daniel thought nothing of it. But then, her interest in him seemed to dwindle even more. The first real red flag came when she canceled a weekend getaway they had planned months in advance. Something urgent came up at work, she had said, avoiding his gaze. Daniel wanted to believe her, so he did. Then came the night that changed everything. It was late, past 11, and Olivia hadn't come home yet. Daniel called her, but she didn't pick up. His gut twisted with an unfamiliar sensation, doubt, suspicion. He knew where she worked, and against his better judgment, he decided to go there. Walking into her office building, he felt ridiculous. Maybe he was overreacting. Maybe she was working late, just as she said. But as he made his way through the quiet halls, something in him knew the truth before he even saw it. The break room door was slightly ajar, and inside, under the harsh fluorescent light, was a scene that burned itself into his memory. Olivia, in a tight red dress, the neckline plunging far lower than she usually wore for work, was pressed against Ryan. Her hands roamed his bare chest, his dress shirt discarded onto the floor. His toned arms were wrapped around her waist, his lips grazing her neck. The laughter between them was intimate, charged. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. His hands clenched into fists. And then she saw him. Her eyes widened, her body going stiff. Ryan turned, confusion giving way to realization as he scrambled to grab his shirt. Olivia's lips parted, but no words came out. The room was suddenly suffocating, and Daniel felt like the air had been knocked out of his lungs. He had walked in on his wife betraying him, and in that moment, his entire world came crashing down. The silence in the room stretched on, heavy and suffocating. Daniel could hear the distant hum of the office air conditioning, the faint rustling of paper from the nearby cubicles. His heart pounded in his ears, each beat a reminder of the devastating truth he had just uncovered. Ryan, now hastily buttoning his shirt, cleared his throat. "Daniel, this This isn't what it looks like, he stammered, his voice barely masking the panic. Olivia reached out as if to touch Daniel, but he took a step back, his movements stiff, mechanical. Please, let me explain, she pleaded, her voice shaking. But Daniel didn't want to hear it. He didn't want to listen to the web of excuses she would undoubtedly weave to justify her betrayal. The emotions surged within him: anger, heartbreak, disbelief. Every moment, every memory they had built together now seemed like a lie. Had she ever truly loved him? Or had she simply been waiting for something? Someone better? He turned on his heel, the weight of what he had seen pressing down on him like an iron vice. He walked away, each step heavier than the last. Olivia called after him, but he didn't turn back. He couldn't. As he exited the building, the crisp night air hit him like a slap, grounding him for the first time since he had stepped inside. He climbed into his car and gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles turning white. He had to think. He had to process. But how could he? How could he possibly come to terms with the fact that the woman he had dedicated his life to had shattered their vows so effortlessly? He didn't know how long he sat there, staring blankly ahead as the reality of his situation sank in. But one thing was certain: his marriage, his trust, his love for Olivia, it would never be the same again. Part 2. Shattered Illusions. Daniel drove aimlessly through the dimly lit streets, the echoes of Olivia's betrayal replaying in his mind like a broken record. His hands trembled against the steering wheel, his jaw clenched so tightly it ached. He felt hollow, stripped of the identity he had built over years of marriage. The woman he had cherished, the life they had shared. It had all been a carefully constructed illusion, and tonight, it had come crashing down in the most brutal way possible. He pulled into a deserted parking lot near the river, needing a moment to collect himself. Staring out at the dark waters, he let out a ragged breath, feeling the sting of tears he refused to shed. He wasn't the type of man to break easily, but this was different. This cut into him deeper than any wound he had ever known. His phone buzzed in the passenger seat. Olivia. He let it ring until it stopped, then watched as a series of texts flooded his screen. Olivia. Daniel, please talk to me. Olivia. I can explain. I swear it wasn't what it looked like. Olivia. Please come home. Let's talk about this. Olivia. I love you. Daniel scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. Love. Was that what she called it? The sight of her wrapped around another man, the way she had looked at Ryan with such unguarded desire. Was that love? His fingers hovered over the screen before he turned the phone off entirely. He couldn't listen to her lies. Not now. Maybe not ever. His mind raced, alternating between rage and sorrow. He wanted answers, but he was terrified of what they might be. Was it a one-time mistake? Or had she been lying to him for months? Years? Had their entire marriage been a lie? Unable to sit still any longer, he started the engine and drove home. He wasn't ready to face her, but he needed something, anything, to make sense of this nightmare. When he arrived at the house, Olivia was waiting on the front steps. She stood as soon as she saw his car pull up, her red dress now wrinkled, her expression a mixture of guilt and desperation. The porch light cast long shadows on her face, making her look more vulnerable than he had ever seen her. He killed the engine but didn't move. For a long moment, they just stared at each other, an unspoken war raging between them. Finally, Olivia took a hesitant step forward. Daniel, please, she whispered. Let's talk. Slowly, he got out of the car, shutting the door with deliberate force. Talk? He repeated, his voice cold. You mean lie? Because that's all you've been doing, isn't it? She flinched but didn't back down. It's not like that. Then tell me what it is, he demanded. Tell me why I walked into your office and found you draped all over Ryan. Her lips parted, but no words came. She wrapped her arms around herself as if the night had suddenly turned cold. It was a mistake, she finally said. A stupid, reckless mistake. Daniel let out a hollow laugh. A mistake? Olivia, a mistake is forgetting an anniversary. A mistake is misplacing your keys. What you did, that was a choice. Tears welled up in her eyes. I never wanted to hurt you. But you did, he said, his voice breaking slightly. You tore us apart. She reached for his hand, but he stepped back. He couldn't bear to feel her touch, not now. Not after seeing her in another man's arms. How long? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. How long has this been going on? She hesitated for just a second too long, and in that hesitation, he had his answer. Daniel's stomach churned. His worst fears were confirmed. This wasn't a one-time lapse in judgment. This was something deeper, something ongoing. I never meant for this to happen, Olivia said. I was feeling lost. Our marriage, it hasn't felt the same for a long time. Daniel's anger flared. So your solution was to spread your legs for another man? She gasped, tears spilling over. It wasn't like that. Save it. His voice was firm, final. You don't get to play the victim here. For a moment, there was nothing but silence between them. The weight of their crumbling marriage pressed down on them both. Finally, Daniel shook his head, stepping past her to the front door. I need time, he muttered. And space. Daniel, please. But he didn't wait for her to finish. He walked inside, shutting the door behind him, leaving Olivia standing alone in the night. Part 3. The Breaking Point. Daniel sat alone in the dimly lit living room, the weight of Olivia's betrayal pressing down on him like an unbearable force. The clock on the wall ticked incessantly, a reminder of the sleepless hours he had endured since discovering the truth. His mind was a battlefield, torn between the memories of the life they had built together and the harsh reality that it had all been a lie. He had always been a man of reason, a man who faced challenges with a calculated approach. But this was different. This wasn't a problem that could be solved with logic or a carefully crafted plan. This was pain, raw and unrelenting. Olivia had tried to talk to him throughout the night, knocking softly on the bedroom door, pleading with him to listen. But he couldn't. Not yet. Maybe not ever. As the first light of dawn seeped through the curtains, Daniel finally stood. He needed clarity, a way to piece together the fragments of his shattered trust. Grabbing his keys, he left the house without a word, driving aimlessly until he found himself parked outside an old friend's bar, the kind of place where people went to forget. The bar was nearly empty, save for a few early drinkers nursing their hangovers. The bartender, a rugged man named Jack, nodded as Daniel took a seat. Rough night? Jack asked, pouring a neat whiskey without being asked. Daniel exhaled sharply. Something like that. Jack studied him for a moment before sliding the glass forward. You look like a man who's got the weight of the world on his shoulders. Daniel swirled the amber liquid in his glass before taking a slow sip. More like the weight of a broken marriage. Jack let out a low whistle. Damn, that bad, huh? Daniel gave a hollow chuckle. Walked in on my wife with another man. Jack didn't respond immediately. Instead, he reached under the counter and pulled out a bottle of something stronger. You want to talk about it? For a long time, Daniel remained silent. Then, as if the floodgates had opened, he spoke. He told Jack everything. About Olivia's restlessness, about the signs he had ignored, about Ryan and the moment his world had shattered. Jack listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally as Daniel poured out his anguish. When he finally finished, Jack leaned against the bar and let out a sigh. You know, I've seen a lot of guys come through here with stories like yours, Jack said. And they all asked the same question. What now? Daniel stared at the whiskey in his glass, his mind racing. I don't know. I don't even know if I can look at her without seeing him. Jack nodded. That's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't just hurt. It changes you. Daniel rubbed his temples. I keep wondering, was I not enough? Did I push her into this? Jack scoffed. Listen, man. Cheating isn't a mistake. It's a decision. A selfish, cruel decision. You gave her a good life. If she was unhappy, she had every chance to talk to you, to fix things. Instead, she went behind your back. That's on her. Daniel absorbed Jack's words, letting them settle. He knew his friend was right. No matter what had gone wrong in their marriage, Olivia had chosen to betray him. So what do I do? Daniel asked, his voice quieter now. Jack took a long sip of his drink before answering. You decide if this is something you can live with. Can you look at her every day and not see the betrayal? Can you rebuild trust that's been shattered? And more importantly, do you even want to? Daniel didn't have an answer. Not yet. As he left the bar, the questions lingered in his mind. He drove back home, his heart heavy with uncertainty. Olivia was waiting for him in the kitchen, her eyes red from crying. Daniel, she started, her voice trembling. Please, we need to talk. He leaned against the doorframe, exhausted. All right, he said finally. Talk. She swallowed hard, taking a shaky breath. I know I hurt you. I know I destroyed everything we had. But I love you. I don't want to lose us. Daniel's expression remained unreadable. Why, he asked. Why did you do it? Olivia wiped at her tears. I was lost. I felt disconnected. But I never stopped loving you. He let out a bitter laugh. That's a funny way of showing love. She flinched at his words. I made a horrible mistake. But if there's even the smallest chance we can fix this, I'll do anything. Daniel studied her, searching for the woman he had once believed in. But all he saw was the stranger who had shattered his heart. Finally, he exhaled. I don't know if I can forgive you. Olivia let out a soft sob. Please don't walk away from us. He hesitated, torn between the memories of what they once had and the painful reality of what they had become. I need time, he said, his voice hoarse. And I don't know if time will be enough. As he turned and walked away, Olivia collapsed into a chair, her sobs echoing through the empty house. Part 4. The Turning Point. Daniel stood in front of the bathroom mirror, staring at his own reflection as the weight of his crumbling marriage pressed down on him. His eyes were hollow, dark circles beneath them evidence of the sleepless nights he had endured since discovering Olivia's betrayal. He could still hear her sobbing from the other room, but he forced himself to shut it out. He had spent too long drowning in her apologies, in the echo of her pleas for forgiveness. But forgiveness wasn't something he could give. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The days passed in a blur. Daniel functioned on autopilot, going through the motions at work, returning home to an unbearable silence. Olivia, once vibrant and full of energy, had become a ghost in their home, her presence a constant reminder of what had been broken. They barely spoke. When they did, it was strained, clipped, void of any warmth. One evening, as he sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at a plate of untouched food, his phone buzzed. A message from his sister, Emily. Emily, I'm worried about you. Come stay with me for a while. You need space. Daniel hesitated, then glanced toward the hallway, where Olivia's shadow loomed just outside their bedroom door. Maybe Emily was right. Maybe he did need space. Packing a bag felt surreal, like closing a chapter of his life without knowing what came next. Olivia stood silently in the doorway as he zipped up his suitcase, her arms wrapped around herself like a shield. Are you leaving me? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know, Daniel admitted, meeting her gaze for the first time in days. But I can't stay here right now. Tears welled in her eyes, but she nodded, stepping aside to let him pass. He paused in the doorway, waiting for her to say something, anything that might change his mind. But she remained silent, and so he walked away. Emily welcomed him with open arms, ushering him inside her cozy apartment and immediately fussing over him like an older sister would. You look like hell, she said, placing a warm mug of coffee in front of him. When was the last time you slept? Daniel shrugged. I don't know. Emily sat across from him, her expression a mixture of concern and frustration. You can't keep punishing yourself like this. He let out a humorless laugh. I'm not the one who should be punished. No, you're not, she agreed. But isolating yourself isn't going to help you figure out what you want. Daniel sighed, rubbing his temples. I just don't know if I can ever look at her the same way again. Emily reached across the table, squeezing his hand. Then maybe it's time to stop looking back and start looking forward. Her words lingered with him in the days that followed. He spent his time trying to rediscover himself outside of his marriage, long walks, late-night conversations with Emily, moments of quiet reflection. And slowly, the fog began to lift. One afternoon, as he sat on a bench at the park, watching families pass by, his phone rang. Olivia. He stared at the screen, debating whether to answer. Finally, he swiped to accept the call. Daniel, she breathed, relief evident in her tone. Thank you for picking up. What do you want, Olivia? He asked, his voice steady. I miss you, she admitted. I know I hurt you, and I'll never forgive myself for it. But I need to know, do we still have a chance? Daniel closed his eyes, exhaling slowly. I don't know, he said honestly. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. I'll do anything, she whispered. Therapy, counseling, whatever it takes. He hesitated. Part of him wanted to believe her, to believe that they could rebuild what had been lost. But another part of him knew that trust, once broken, was nearly impossible to repair. I need more time, he finally said. I'll wait, she promised. No matter how long it takes. Days turned into weeks, and Daniel found himself grappling with a decision that seemed impossible. Could he truly give Olivia another chance? Could he silence the images that haunted him every time he closed his eyes? He found solace in his work, throwing himself into projects, staying late at the office just to avoid returning to the empty apartment. But no matter how busy he kept himself, he couldn't outrun the memories. One evening, he met up with an old friend, Jason, for drinks. Jason had been through a similar ordeal years ago, and if anyone could offer advice, it was him. "Listen, man," Jason said, swirling his glass. "You have to ask yourself, are you staying because you still love her, or are you staying because you're afraid to start over?" Daniel frowned, considering the question. "I don't know," he admitted. I just want to make the right choice." Jason nodded. "There is no right choice, Dan. There's only what you can live with." That night, Daniel lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. What could he live with? Could he live with the pain of losing Olivia entirely? Or was the pain of betrayal something he could learn to overcome? He still didn't have an answer, but he knew one thing. Whatever he decided, it had to be for himself. Part 5. The Final Decision. Daniel stood at the edge of the pier, the crisp morning air biting at his skin as he stared out at the vast ocean before him. The waves rolled in steady and sure, an unrelenting force that mirrored the turmoil in his heart. The last few weeks had been a storm of emotions, pulling him in different directions, each day bringing with it a new battle between resentment and longing, between anger and the aching need for closure. He had spent hours contemplating Olivia's betrayal, replaying their years together, the laughter, the love, the quiet moments that had once defined their marriage. And yet, no matter how many memories he sifted through, he couldn't erase the image of her with another man. Could he ever forgive? Could he ever move forward without that image haunting him? The sound of footsteps behind him broke his reverie. He turned to find Emily approaching, a concerned expression on her face. She had been his rock through all of this, never pushing him to make a decision, but always reminding him that he had to make one eventually. "You've been out here a long time," she said, pulling her coat tighter around herself. Daniel nodded. "I needed to think." Emily sighed, stepping beside him. "And? Have you figured it out?" He exhaled, rubbing a hand over his tired face. "I don't know. Part of me wants to believe we can fix this, that she really means it when she says she'll do anything to make it right. But," Emily prompted gently, "but another part of me wonders if I'll ever trust her again," he admitted. "I don't want to live my life doubting every late night at the office, every phone call, every unexplained moment." Emily nodded. "That's not a life, Dan. That's a sentence." He let out a short, humorless laugh. "Yeah." She turned to face him, her expression serious. "You need to decide what you can live with. If you truly believe you can rebuild trust, then give it a shot. But if you know, deep down, that you'll never see her the same way again, don't drag this out." Daniel swallowed hard, his hands curling into fists. He had spent so long trying to hold on to something that might already be gone. But was love alone enough to salvage a broken marriage? Later that evening, he found himself outside their house, the place they had built together. His key felt heavy in his palm as he hesitated before unlocking the door. The house was quiet when he stepped inside, the only sound the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. Olivia sat at the dining table, a mug of tea in front of her, her hands wrapped around it as if drawing warmth. She looked up as he entered, hope flickering in her eyes. "You came back," she whispered. He nodded but didn't sit down. "We need to talk." She swallowed, nodding. "Okay." Daniel took a slow breath, steadying himself. "I've spent weeks trying to figure out if I can move past this, if I can rebuild what we lost." Olivia's grip on the mug tightened. "And I don't think I can." The words hung heavy between them, final and unrelenting. Olivia sucked in a sharp breath, tears welling up instantly. "Daniel, I wish I could," he interrupted gently. "But every time I look at you, I see him. I see what you did, and I can't live like that." Tears streamed down her cheeks. "I love you," she choked out. "I love you so much." Daniel's own eyes burned, but he forced himself to stay strong. "I loved you too, and maybe, in some way, I always will. But love isn't enough. Not when trust is gone." Olivia sobbed, her hands trembling. Please, I'll do anything. Therapy, counseling. Just don't leave me. He closed his eyes, hating how much this hurt. It's not about what you can do, Liv. It's about what's already been done. A silence stretched between them, broken only by the sound of her quiet weeping. Finally, she nodded, her shoulders sagging with defeat. I understand, she whispered. Daniel stepped back, his chest tight. I'll stay at Emily's until we figure out the logistics. Olivia nodded again, unable to look at him. He turned, walking toward the door, pausing only once before opening it. I hope you find happiness, Olivia. And then, without another word, he walked out, leaving behind the home they had built and the love that had been shattered beyond repair. As he stepped into the night, the air felt lighter, as if a weight had finally lifted. For the first time in weeks, he felt something resembling peace. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. He was finally free. The end.